The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Funny thing about this sports radio business, which I've been in since it started 38 years ago. In like November or December, somebody invariably will say to you, "Oh boy, you must really be busy." No, we're not. That's when the news comes to us. That's the teeth of the football season. That's the NFL, which is by far the most popular sport in the United States. We don't have to seek out the news. You know when it's hard? You know when you're really busy? It's July, when there's nothing going on. But every once in a while, something falls from the sky in the dearth of summer that gives you something to talk about. And yesterday, the Nationals did that by firing general manager Mike Rizzo and firing manager Davey Martinez. And now we got something to talk about today. We'll get into that, all the speculation about what this means going forward. Could this be the start of a sale? Could this be that they cleared the decks, that there won't be a general manager or a manager under contract next year? And plus the ability to get out of the Masson deal, that will make it more attractive to sell the team. Plus what franchisers are now selling for in sports, where you've had the Lakers go for $10 billion, the Celtics for $8 billion. Well, since the Nats went up for sale, or at least they started to explore sale possibilities, the Commanders sold for $6 billion. So the price of $2.1 billion, which was, I believe, the asking price for the Nationals when they went up a few years ago, that might be a price that they can now get and might be willing to do that. As far as Ted Leonsis owning the team, I'm not too excited about that, but it does appear that there is a lot of confusion and a lot of mess going on with the Lerner ownership. And yesterday they made a move which, really needed to be made, especially with Davey Martinez. Since they won the World Series in 2019, they have the second most losses in baseball. They've been bad. They have spent, and this is really an amazing stat, since winning the World Series, they have spent exactly 6 days over 500. Yeah. I mean, you'd think even you might get hot like in April and May. No. 4 days over 500 in 2021 and 2 days over 500 last year. This year has included an 11-game losing streak, and it's included the manager, Davey Martinez, saying this. This was only 3 weeks ago as they were in the midst of this losing streak. And Martinez, from reports, really pissed off his clubhouse with these remarks.
It's never on coaching. Never on coaching. Okay, coaches work their asses off every single day. We're not going to finger point here and say it's coaches. It's never on the coaches. Okay, they work hard. The message is clear. All the work is done prior. So sometimes they got to go out there and they got to play the game. It's always been about the players. Always. I played this game a long time. Never once have I blamed the coach for anything. I mean, we worked our asses off to get better. They gave us information and we used it. So these guys understand what the game is, man. These coaches. I never had such a group of coaches that worked as hard as they do. I mean, they're here freaking diligently. They go over everything. They sit with players every day. These coaches, they work their asses off. So, and I know every coach's staff is like that. So, sometimes, and the players know. Sometimes, you got to put the onus on the players. They got to go out there and they got to play the game and play the game the right way. We can't hit for them. We can't catch the balls for them. We can't pitch for them. We can't throw strikes for them. They got to do that.
He was right on June 14th. What Davey Martinez said, that was in fact true. That the coaches can't do. You just don't say that. And the reporting was that the players were caught off guard by that, and they were not happy about him saying that. And that may have been the beginning of the end. He did manage to stay for 3 more weeks, but they get swept in this series by Boston, clobbered in the first 2 games, and lose yesterday. And now Davey Martinez is the ex-manager of the Nats, and Mike Rizzo is out. Now, there are people look at this and come up with all kinds of ideas on why both of them go on the same day. From what I understand, there were windows for both of them on contract options for next year, which would be probably in the next week or so, that if they were to be picked up, then they would have contracts at least through next year, maybe 2 years. I don't know. So the Lerners decided, well, we don't necessarily want to have either of these guys on board for next year, so we might as well cut them loose now, and we won't owe them any money. There's also been this thrown out that although Mike Rizzo hired Davey Martinez, and I put that in air quotes because I believe that was done by ownership, that they did have great success together in winning the World Series. They did appear to have a very good relationship. And maybe Mike Rizzo was told to fire Davey Martinez. He didn't want to do it, so they fired both of them. That happens from time to time. I'm not prone to believe that. I don't think that happened. I mean, Rizzo's been in baseball for 50 years, almost 50 years. He understands how it works. And when you have the second most losses since winning the World Series, I mean, it's a results-based business. You have to make changes. So I don't necessarily buy that. But I do look at what has happened with the two of them, and Barry Zerluga's got a column today in which he says, in talking to both Martinez and Rizzo in spring training, he got the impression that maybe they were a little bit too comfortable, that after, 5 straight years of losing after the World Series, that they had to step up in a big way this year. He didn't get that sense from them. Also, Rizzo, in a text message to Barry Zerluga last night after he got booted, he said, the sun will come up tomorrow. He says, that's the job. I had a great run. Navigated that ownership group for almost 20 years. And I think that says a mouthful there, that he was working for a group of owners who, frankly, were, kind of running around like chickens with their heads cut off, especially after Ted Lerner died in his mid-90s back in February of 2023. And this is something that I've heard from a number of people close to the organization. Barry's got it in his column today. He says that Lerner's sons-in-law, I guess, Edward Cohen and Robert Tannenbaum, along with his daughters, Deborah Cohen and Marla Tannenbaum, a third generation of Ted's grandkids, is sometimes involved. There's a herding cats element to it all, and it can make it hard to find consensus with an individual decision as well as an overall direction. So that would lead you to that quote from Rizzo, navigated that ownership group for the last 20 years, and frankly, they haven't spent any money. I mean, they got burned badly on the Strasburg deal. I would make that deal 100 times out of 100. They're coming off the World Series. He's the World Series MVP. He stayed healthy the full year. He was like 30 years old. They gave him a long-term contract. Great starting pitching is hard to find. It blew up in their face. He essentially gave them nothing. Injured, finally retired, and they owe him all the money. I get that. But the reality is, after that, who did they sign? Nobody. They spent no money. You got to spend some money to stay competitive, and they did not do that. Now, as for this happening a week before, July 15th is the Major League Draft, a week before the draft happened, this is Mark Zuckerman on the Nats Chat podcast that he does with Al Galdi. His thinking on the timing of all this.
This is 1 week exactly before the draft, in which the Nationals hold the number 1 pick in the draft. You know that Mike Rizzo was geared up for that, the old scout himself with the chance to pick number 1 yet again. By the way, you mentioned when his interim tag was taken off back in 2009, he became the permanent GM. That occurred right after they signed Steven Strasburg after drafting him. And it was a big question, would they get him to sign? Or would he take a pass and wouldn't accept whatever the offer was? Back then, there was a lot more flexibility. That's the week that he was hired full-time to be the GM. And here we are a week before they have a chance to draft number 1 again. And as far as we know, he's not a part of that process unless they already made the decision prior to this date. So that part of it, I think, is fascinating. And I don't know if poetic's the right word for it, but man, that occurred to me, the bizarre timing of that. And oh, by the way, there's also going to be a new manager that we'll find out on Monday. And what it means is that really the rest of the season is an interim season for everybody. and then they figure out what they're going to do at the end of all that.
Well, you may remember back in 2011, this was really bizarre. Jim Riggleman was the manager, and he had taken over on an interim basis. And the team was playing well. It was getting to that point in the season where they had to pick up his option, or no, I guess he was playing. I guess he was managing without assurance for the following year, and that's when he decided to pull a power play after a win. And he said, if you're not going to extend me, I'm going to quit. And he did. I mean, that was amazing because it's not like Jim Riggleman was Casey Stengel and people were lining up to hire him. So he walked away, and I think it was a road game, maybe in Philadelphia, New York. Came home that night and bought drinks for people at Caddy's on Cordell and Bethesda. But yeah, he walked away at that point. And Davey Johnson, who was working as a consultant to the team, he wasn't managing anywhere, wasn't in the minor leagues, anything like that. They named him the interim manager. And things went well in 2011. They brought him back in 2012, and they had the division championship, first one that year. And Davey did a good job, didn't win the World Series. He was eventually forced out. Dusty Baker came in. Dusty did a good job, I thought, but they didn't want to pay him. So ownership, and I don't believe it was Lerner, because I think it was Lerner, excuse me. I don't think it was Rizzo, because Rizzo apparently liked Dusty, and Dusty got him to the playoffs both years he managed. But they made the change. They did not make it the first year. And the second year, remember this, they're coming out of Memorial Day weekend. They're 19-31. And the big conversation on the field as they get ready to open up a homestand is, are they going to fire Davey Martinez? And Mike Rizzo says, no, we're not going to do that. And he turned it around. They went from 19-31 to World Series champions. And that has, of course, bought him a lot of time since then. If they did not win the World Series in 2019, we wouldn't have gotten to this point with Davey Martinez, where he makes it to the middle of his 8th year. That wasn't going to happen, but it did. As far as why this happens now, I think among the reasons is this window where they have to say whether they're going to renew for next year for both Davey and Rizzo. And the other thing is they've been stinking it up, including the 11-game losing streak last month. And this weekend, as Zuckerman points out in the Nats Chat podcast, is kind of a microcosm of where this organization is right now.
The way that they lost the first 2 games of the series, blowouts in which there were pretty lifeless performances and a lot of the team's weaknesses were on display. Bad defense, bad pitching, bad bullpen, even some bad base running thrown in there as well. I think that could prompt some of it. I'm sure, as you would probably agree, when they had the 11-game losing streak last month, all of a sudden everyone's ears are perked up. Okay, what do we need to do here? Do we need to start considering making some changes? And they didn't at the time. We thought maybe that was a sign that they're going to, wait this out now and go to the end of the season. We also know, we've discussed, that both Rizzo and Martinez had options for next season to be picked up at some point in July. I don't know the specific date of that. I kind of thought all along maybe somewhere around the All-Star break would make sense for that, but I don't know the exact specifics of that. So perhaps they got to a point that said, we're not picking up the options. Are we going to now go through the rest of the season with these 2 essentially as lame ducks and say, well, we're still going to evaluate you and then we'll decide at the end of the year what to do? Or has the performance as we've seen it here been so striking, and we know ultimately that changes are needed, that we just need to go ahead and do it right now? I'm guessing they got to that point based on what they had seen throughout the month of June, but also during this homestand, and particularly the first 2 games of the series. Now, I think the decision probably was already made prior to this, but if you needed a final nail in the coffin, maybe more so on Mike Rizzo than on Davey Martinez. If you were at the ballpark on Sunday, if you remember ownership and you were there, and I know obviously they were there, and in the top of the first inning, a guy named Shinosuke Ogasawara takes the mound to make his major league debut for you. This is the first Japanese player the Nationals had ever signed directly out of Asia as a free agent. He was given a 2-year, $3.5 million deal. What we saw of him in spring training was very unimpressive. He didn't exactly do a lot in the minor leagues. That said, he's screaming to be called up, dealt with an injury as well. Comes in to make his major league debut, and 5 batters in, They're trailing 4-0. Again, I think the decision was already made, but if you needed one last final, the stars are aligning here and telling us that whatever we're doing right now is not working, and that's not just on the manager, but it goes higher up than that. Maybe that kind of sealed the deal. They said, okay, it's time to do it. The other factor real quick would be this is the end of a homestand. They're off on Monday. They start a road trip Tuesday in St. Louis. You make that kind of move usually in a case like that. You don't wait till they're already on the road. You make the move at the end of the homestand. The team leaves town. The manager and GM stay behind.
Yep, exactly. And we know that Mike DeBartolo is taking over as the interim GM. We are expected to find out today who the manager is going to be when they take the field against St. Louis tomorrow night. Look, Mike Rizzo did a great job in making trades. When he was told that they weren't going to re-sign Juan Soto, and there was no way that was going to happen as you saw the money get over $700 million, I think he made a great trade. Pretty obviously he made a great trade. They got 2 All-Stars going to the game next week in Atlanta, James Wood and Mackenzie Gore. C.J. Abrams was an All-Star last year. They got Robert Hassel, who may turn out to be a terrific player in the deal, and Harlan Susanna, who also may turn out. So they did good jobs with that. Kind of reminds me of what Ernie Grunfeld did. Ernie was really good at making trades, not so much in the draft, and maybe that turns out to be the final nail in the Rizzo GM coffin here, as is pointed out by Gabe Locks in a column they wrote in USA Today, that Rizzo was undercut by his inability to, in the final 10-plus years of his tenure, install a drafting and player development infrastructure to keep the talent pipeline moving. Since drafting Anthony Rendon 6th overall in 2011, the Nationals were largely a developmental black hole, save for guys who found greater success, see Lucas Giolito, Nick Pivetta, Eric Fetty, after the Nationals flipped them elsewhere. So didn't do a really good job in the draft and didn't develop players. There could be reasons for that, including the organization didn't spend money on things that other teams spent money on, such as analytics. A lot of things could have led to this, but this is a guy who is a scout. Mike Rizzo's job for most of his career is to find talent in high school and in college, and in the end, that didn't work out that way. I mean, it was pretty easy to draft Steven Strasburg number 1. It was pretty easy to draft Bryce Harper number 1. I mean, those guys were once-in-a-lifetime players. But the job is to continue to keep the pipeline moving, keep players coming, especially for a team that wasn't signing players long-term, except for Strasburg, and that blew up. So, you got to look at the Rizzo tenure, who was there for almost 20 years, and say, at some point it was going to end, and it ends this way. I like him very much. I think he's a great general manager. If he wants to find work someplace else, he will, obviously. But it's a results-based business, and second most losses in baseball since winning the World Series, not going to cut it. So, again, we'll find out today who the manager will be for the rest of the season. I guess if he does a great job, he's got a chance to stay for next year. And the interim general manager, Mike DeBartolo, will be making the draft pick next week when the Nationals draft number 1. Coming up, some stuff to catch up on from when I was off last week, including what is going on now in the NBA with Malik Beasley and other sports as well, as I guess this was inevitable as well. Once professional sports got in bed with gambling. We'll talk about that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
If you're just jumping in your car, spent the last few minutes going over the firings of Davey Martinez and Mike Rizzo. I'll have more to say on that. I also mentioned that I took off last week because this is the period of time when there's usually not much going on in sports. You'll notice if you listen to sports radio, either nationally or locally, you'll find many of the regular hosts are off. This is the time to do it. But every once in a while, a big news bomb drops, as it did yesterday with both Rizzo and Martinez getting the boot. And so I'll have more to say coming up on that. The reason I was not here, I was visiting my son and daughter-in-law. They got married last November, and they live in Seattle, her hometown. She's a dentist, and he's a teacher. He's off now, so it was great. We got to hang out last week, and Nicole was off for part of the week as well, including when we went to the game on July 4th. Seattle played Pittsburgh, and I'd never been to the new Mariners Park. It's one of those phone names. It used to be Safeco, and now it's something else like AT&T or whatever. But it's a great ballpark, and you actually have a view of the Seattle skyline. And I remember when they were building Nats Park, and I was working with Steve Zabin, we were invited out there by John Myers, who was working for the team, to see some of the construction. I even have an old Nationals construction helmet, the red with a curly W on it. It's really cool. But we were told, oh, yeah, they're building it so you can see the Washington skyline. You'll be able to see the Capitol and the monument. Well, you really can't. And one of the reasons is a learner-owned building sits right there in center field and blocks the view. That's not the case in Seattle. You get to see the whole ballpark. And as a bonus, one of the biggest stories, if not the biggest story in baseball the first half of the season is Cam Reddish, the catcher for the Mariners, who's having an unbelievable year. And in this game, he hit his 34th and 35th home run. That's the most he's hit in a season, much less half a season. Is he going to break the Aaron Judge record, what I believe is the clean record of 62 home runs? Probably not. Catchers wear down. But the interesting thing with catchers these days is that unlike the old days of the National League, or even going back prior to 1973, if you weren't catching, you weren't in the lineup. Mike Piazza, who played his career in the National League, or at least most of it. I think he played for Florida as well. But most of his career was spent in the National League, so there was no designated hitter when he played. Yogi Berra, obviously no designated hitter. Johnny Bench, entire career in the National League, no designated hitter. Well, now you have it in both leagues, and a guy like Cam Reddish can play some catcher, and in the case of the game we saw, which was a day game after a night game, he could DH, and DHing hit 2 home runs. So that was really cool. That was a lot of fun. And we did a lot of hiking, and we took a little boat trip to San Juan Island. It was really nice. Beautiful days, beautiful weather, beautiful people to hang out with. I really had a wonderful time doing that. So I'm catching up on a lot of things when I got back. Not that I wasn't aware of some of these things, reading Twitter and reading ESPN.com and the Post Online and things like that. But the ugly head of gambling has reared again with Detroit Pistons young star Malik Beasley being investigated by federal prosecutors in connection with alleged gambling on games during the 2023-24 season. And Candace Buckner has a really good column that she wrote last week about this, and how, as the headline says, with sports gambling, leagues win, players lose. We also have Guardians pitcher Luis Ortiz placed on non-disciplinary paid leave just as he was about to take the mound last week. And you know that the Guardians have partnered with Fanatics. The Pistons have partnered with FanDuel Sports as well. And this is now, very much a part of the fabric of professional sports and college sports. And she writes, announcers paid by networks or by teams introduce prop bets near the top of broadcasts of live games. ESPN Bet has 5.3 million followers on X, more than the network's feed for NFL news. Sports betting feels like the unoffensive and inconspicuous wallpaper plastered everywhere in the office. You can't tell where it begins or ends, and pretty soon it just blends in so well into the background you'll forget it's there, she writes. Now, Beasley was about to get a contract that was going to pay him $14 million a year for the next 3 years. That's not going to happen anymore. We've already had Jonte Porter kicked out of the league for the rest of his life for betting on games. And she writes, clearly the threat of getting caught hasn't deterred every pro from trying to cash in. As sports betting has grown into this ubiquitous force, it's almost naive to expect people who spend their lives around these games to abstain. Excellent point. David Purdom covers gambling for ESPN. He was on Dan Patrick's show last week as this news was breaking about what exactly was going on with Malik Beasley.
Exactly the details of which games and what went down with him are still unknown at this time, but he is the third NBA player in just the last 18 months to be reportedly under investigation by the feds. for betting allegations, and he joins Jonte Porter and Terry Rozier.
Okay, this is different than the NBA investigating. What happens when there's a federal probe? How do they investigate as opposed to what the NBA would do?
Well, this all started back again with the Jonte Porter thing, and they subpoenaed some of the sports books for betting records for individuals that they suspected may have been involved. And so my working premise is that they probably had those subpoena records, the betting records, went through them and see what some of the unusual betting activity on some of these other games. So they're working through everything right now, communicating with the sports books, the attorneys, and so forth to see where it goes.
Okay, but give us a red flag. Give us what happens when all of a sudden somebody goes, wait a minute, something's suspicious.
That's a great question. And when bookmakers really are convinced that something is untoward is going on is when they move the odds, right? So a prop bet may be over under 2.5 for rebounds or whatever. And instead of moving, up to 4.5, they'll adjust the vig on if you want to bet the over, it may be minus 200. When they adjust the odds and the bettors don't stop betting it and just keep betting it, even though these odds have moved against them, it is a major red flag. In fact, some bookmakers will tell me they will do it intentionally, moving it overly aggressive, move these odds so crazy that nobody that was really trying to bet it seriously would keep betting, and yet people do keep betting it, and then they know, something's going on.
How dangerous are prop bets since an individual can control a lot of what his numbers are?
Yeah, certainly they are more easily to be manipulated than a full game. If you just have a player that's over under on rebounds or 3-pointers made or points, that's what happened with the Jonte Porter situation. There was all these bets on unders on his statistics. Then he took himself out of the game within minutes, and so all the unders hit. So prop bets definitely are a concern. There's a debate to be had whether we should be offering in the regulated market prop bets on all these individual players.
Well, I know that college took away the prop bets, or Vegas took away prop bets on college athletes, correct?
Some of the states have. Vegas has not. I think there's about 18 states that now prohibit individual player props on college athletes.
Yeah, because, that's tricky when you're a college kid. And you know what happens here, David? I mentioned this, that these guys probably think nobody's going to notice this.
Yep.
Hey, I'm going to do this. Nobody will notice. Well, Vegas has to notice this. It's imperative that they notice these things. And anybody out there who thinks nobody is going to notice if I do just this or this and I play for this team, nobody follows University of Alabama, Birmingham. They do. They have to.
You're right, 100%. And you'll hear people go, the sports books are in it. No, the sports books are the ones that lose when these bets are not on the up and up. They're the ones that detect it. So you're absolutely right there. There's what's the saying, two people can keep a secret. If it gets past there, it's over. Greed starts to get involved. Hey, I made a little money here from keeping it quiet. Let me tell my buddy, he makes a little bit of money. All of a sudden, there's this flood of money coming in on these random games that people are like, where is this coming from? So it does to get detected.
NBA hasn't responded yet to Malik Beasley?
That's correct. They said they're cooperating with the federal investigation.
That is David Purdum, Purdahum, David Purdum, who is a gambling expert, works for ESPN, writes about gambling. And, the flip side of the negative of this, is that, we've got more players that are surfacing here and thinking that they won't get caught and betting on games where betting is a big part of professional sports now and college sports. The flip side is, and this was the argument when they wanted to have legalized gambling, is if there is action going on, if there is fixing, point shaving, whatever it is, it's going to get flagged because it's going to be regulated. And there will be more attention on it rather than offshore bookies and things like that. So in one sense, you're saying, oh, man, starting pitcher getting nailed, a basketball player due to make $14 million a year getting nailed. Yes, but on the other hand, we might not have noticed this if the betting was going on under the table, through a bookie that we see now because of the regulation of this. And there is a red flag where an enormous amount of money on a seemingly innocuous game comes up. So while it is a bad look for sure for these type of names to be surfacing in their sports, a starting pitcher and a starting player on the Detroit Pistons, on the other hand, we might not have known about this if we didn't have the legalized gambling and the red flagging that goes on for that. We had an anniversary over the weekend, which had it been today or tomorrow or something like that, I certainly would have spent a lot more time on this. But this was a seminal moment for tennis, and it was 50 years ago on July 5th, so that would have been Saturday, 50 years ago, July 5th, 1975, that Arthur Ashe beat Jimmy Connors to win Wimbledon. That was the last Grand Slam title that Ashe would ever win. He was aging. He was 32, which is old for tennis. And Jimmy Connors was the super brat of tennis when John McEnroe was still in high school. And the interesting thing about the two of them meeting, not just the fact that Arthur Ashe became the first African-American to win Wimbledon, he also won a U.S. Open, but it was the fact that both of them had grown up playing on the public courts. Arthur Ashe in Richmond, his mother had passed away, and his father raised he and his brother. And Arthur became an excellent tennis player, went on to play at UCLA, and then became a professional. And Jimmy Connors, who was taught tennis by his mother and grandmother, also grew up playing on the public courts. This was not the country club kids that we were used to seeing. But Arthur Ashe was a great person, a great human being, and fought for equality, fought for rights, sadly died in his late 40s, I believe, like 47 or 48, from AIDS that he had contracted through a blood transfusion. He had some health issues, and the bags of blood were not properly checked, and it cost him his life. But Jimmy Connors was the favorite. He had been the one that most thought would win Wimbledon. He hadn't lost a set along the way to getting to the final, and he had been 3-0 against Arthur Ashe during the two of their careers. But Arthur Ashe, although he was one who was very, very classy, wouldn't say anything negative. He said Connors was an exception, didn't like him, and Ashe came up with a strategy that was not expected. He had a big serve. He had something of a power game. He came up with, as is described here in a biography by Ray Arsenault, Ashe ditched his big serving, audacious game and fed Connors nothing but a soggy diet of low angles and limp, fluttering returns. He chipped balls that died on arrival, cut the speed of his serve, and seemed to decide which shot he would use a second before he swung. Connors was so thoroughly out of sorts after winning the first game of the first set, he lost the next 9, and Ashe executed one of the most shocking upsets in tennis history, winning in 4 sets, 2 hours, 5 minutes. He was the first black man to win the Wimbledon singles title, the second black person, following Althea Gibson's trophies in 1957 and 58, remains the only black male champion of tennis's most prestigious event. And there's been a number of biographies that have been done on him, but the brother, Johnny, it was Johnny and Arthur. They were the two boys after the mother died when I think Arthur was 6. The sacrifices that Johnny made for him, because Arthur Ashe was stationed. He was actually drafted, and he was stationed at the U.S. Military Academy in West Point during the height of the Vietnam War. And Johnny, who had served 2 terms, knew that it would be better for him to serve rather than derail his brother's tennis career, and volunteered for another tour of duty so that 2 brothers would not be in the war at the same time. That goes back to Saving Private Ryan. And that's when Arthur Ashe became an activist. He had exhibitions in apartheid South Africa and really became an incredible advocate for civil rights during his career, and understood that he had this role because of his profile, wrote books about it and things like that. But I do remember 50 years ago what this meant, how important it was, not just because it was a black man winning Wimbledon, but it was a way of, kind of shutting up Jimmy Connors. This was not like Joe Namath and the Jets beating Johnny Unitas and the Baltimore Colts or Earl Morrall, who was the quarterback. This was a new era in professional sports where you could have somebody like Jimmy Connors, and not unlike Muhammad Ali, but certainly not the historical figure, both in sports and culture, that Ali was. But Connors was a part of this new breed that we hadn't seen before in tennis. It was very much of an erudite sport, and here comes this kid off the public courts who doesn't mind raising a ruckus and complaining to the chair umpires and things like that. And the very classy Arthur Ashe, who's older, coming to the twilight of his career, comes off and beats him at Wimbledon. A major, major event, both in sports and in culture, happening 50 years ago this past weekend. Coming up, we'll get some more reaction to the moves that were made yesterday by the Nationals. Davey Martinez out, Mike Rizzo out. We're waiting to find out who the interim manager will be for a team that's once again headed nowhere. Another season further removed from the World Series. We'll get to that. Plus, Bill Cowher on what you find out from championship coaches. They remember the losses far more than the wins. That and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. Just 8 words from fired Nats GM Mike Rizzo. Navigated that ownership group for almost 20 years. That says a lot, and it tells you the story of how he was able to stay in that job as long as he did. Now, he did produce a World Series, but the results since then have been abysmal. Not all of it his fault, for sure, but it's a results-based business. You have to win, and the fact that he didn't win for a long time, yet stayed on the job, stayed in the organization for almost 20 years, tells you that he had to learn to deal with the Michigas, which he did quite effectively. A very likable guy, excellent general manager. If he wants to work, he will work. He's 64 years old. I know he's got a young son. He got remarried just a few years ago, and he bought a house in this area. He's put down some roots. He will probably remain here, but probably work for another organization. But yeah, his family is going to stay here in Washington, and that's a good thing. He's really a terrific guy, and I think has done a good job under very difficult circumstances. And some of that is outlined in a column that Barry Zverluga wrote today. He says, no significant decision has been made by Nationals ownership since the death of Ted Lerner, the self-made family patriarch who was the Lerner's guiding light. Ted Lerner died in February of 2023. Even before that, his son, Mark, had served as the club's point person. But the reality is that decisions were made by a group, Ted Lerner's son-in-law, Edward Cohen, and Robert Tannenbaum, as well as daughters Deborah Cohen and Marla Tannenbaum. A third generation, Ted's grandkids, is sometimes involved. He says there's a herding cats element to it all and can make it hard to find consensus with an individual decision as well as an overall direction. And on top of that, really, the Lerners have made only one significant hire in terms of front office since they bought the team in 2006. Now, if you remember this, when the Nationals became the Nationals in 2005, moving from Montreal, they were owned by Major League Baseball. And they had a general manager who was a clown, Jim Bowden. Once he was out in a scandal which involved skimming bonus money from prospects and fudging their ages and so forth, prospects from overseas. He has never worked in baseball again. He's done some broadcasting work, but he'll never work for a team again. And Mike Rizzo, who had been hired by Stan Kasten, you remember, as part of the deal for Major League Baseball to sell the team to the Lerners during the 2006 season, was that Stan Kasten, who was involved in another ownership group, would join them because he had a background in running teams. He had run the Atlanta Hawks. He'd run the Atlanta Braves. He worked for Ted Turner for a long time, so it seemed to be a very good marriage. And from what I understand, from what I've been told, he did not want Jim Bowden. But Bowden did a really good job of romancing the learners. He made them think he was competent. So he stayed on the job after the sale went through. Most people thought he was going to be fired, but he stayed on the job. So Kasten, understanding that he needed somebody in there who wasn't a buffoon like Bowden, he got Mike to come here from, I think he'd been in Arizona. He'd been the assistant general manager when the Diamondbacks won the World Series in 2001. He had worked in other organizations as well. He had been a minor league player, and he had a background in scouting. And so when the scandal hit, which was 2013, that was the end of Bowden, and then Rizzo took over as the general manager and was able to build a World Series team. He hired some of the managers. Some worked out, some did not. And he hired Davey Martinez. I believe that he wanted to keep Dusty Baker. I've been told that was the case, but management wanted to make a change, partly because of salary. Like, they were going to have to pay Dusty, and they didn't want to do that. So they got Martinez on the cheap, and he had been on Joe Madden's staff when the Cubs had won the World Series. So he had the background to do it. One of the things I didn't like about Davey initially was when he first took over as manager, he took over a team that had been to the playoffs on a regular basis for 7 years, and they just needed to get over the hump. And he did what I thought was a Joe Madden move by bringing camels to spring training. Get over the hump. You got to be your own guy. And eventually he did. I mean, he was liked by the players. I remember hearing Ryan Zimmerman talk about how much he had the players' backs. There were no big dust-ups or anything like that. He kept his hand on the keel evenly, and he also, when things would go bad, he would always say, hey, it's one at a time. Got to go 1-0 today. Never lost his cool except at the end, and that's why I played this again. This was while they were in the midst of an 11-game losing streak last month, and while this may not have been the tipping point, it certainly didn't help him, because the reports were that the players were blindsided by these remarks. That there were a lot of fundamental problems with the team, base running, errors, things like that. And there was a tendency to blame the coaches. I didn't necessarily say manager. They said, coaches. They've changed coaches in the past. Batting instructors get fired when the team is slumping. It happens all the time. But Davey had his staff's back. That's what he was trying to point out here. But he also, it sounded like, threw the players under the bus.
It's never on coaching. Never on coaching. Okay, coaches work their asses off every single day. We're not going to finger point here and say it's coaches. It's never on the coaches. Okay, they work hard. The message is clear. All the work is done prior. So sometimes they got to go out there and they got to play the game. It's always been about the players. Always. I played this game a long time. Never once have I blamed the coach for anything. I mean, we worked our asses off to get better. They gave us information and we used it. So these guys understand what the game is, man. These coaches, I never had such a group of coaches that worked as hard as they do. I mean, they're here freaking diligently. They go over everything. They sit with players every day. These coaches, they work their asses off. So, and I know every coach's staff is like that. So, sometimes, the players know. Sometimes, you got to put the onus on the players. They got to go out there and they got to play the game and play the game the right way. We can't hit for them. We can't catch the balls for them. We can't pitch for them. We can't throw strikes for them. They got to do that.
That was Davey Martinez, June 14th. So roughly 3 weeks before he was fired. Fired after they got swept by the Red Sox. 2 games where they got absolutely clobbered, and then with a rookie pitcher on the mound yesterday who never got off the ground, they lost 6-4. They are now, 16 games under 500. Last place, going nowhere. Jeff Passan, who broke the story for ESPN, had this analysis, not just of what happened, but the timing of it, with the draft coming up next week and the Nationals holding the first pick.
The Nationals have the #1 overall draft pick a week from today, and it's not often you see both a general manager and a manager get fired in season, but particularly in front of such an important draft where the #1 pick is not by any means clear at this point, but the Nationals have struggled in recent seasons. They have not made that leap forward that they were hoping, and today both executive Mike Rizzo and manager Davey Martinez are gone from the team.
Man, and, that news is tough because obviously you never want to see that. But obviously this Nationals team has really, really underperformed. When you think about it, especially from the pitching side of things, they've allowed so many runs. The offense has gotten better. We understand they have good young offensive players. But in order for them to start to compete, and Jeff talked about it, they're in last place. Next year, they're supposed to be towards the top as far as what you're looking at and projecting for a team that's already gone through a rebuild. The pitching hasn't gotten where it needs to be. They're losing at home, 18-28 at home. You expect them to be better. They've got to come out of it.
Dave Martinez and Mike Rizzo combined to win a World Series in 2019. Yeah. Jeff, I understand the front office move with the draft a week away. Is there any explanation for why firing the manager before the All-Star break right now?
Yeah, I mean, Dave Martinez has said some stuff publicly, about how the players have to be as accountable as everyone else for these losses, and it did not go over well in the clubhouse. There's truth to it. Like, it's reality, but it's just not what managers tend to say. I think you look at the development of some of the younger players. Dylan Cruz, former number 1 overall pick, has struggled, as he's gotten to the big leagues. They haven't seen the team take the step forward aside from James Wood and Mackenzie Gore. I think that they expected. But let's also acknowledge the Nationals haven't spent money in a while. They very easily could have gone after Alex Bregman, for example, this winter, and they were just not in there at all on any of the major free agents. And look, I think sometimes ownership wants to see improvement on the field before they go out and supplement it. But I remember when there were young players coming up with the Chicago Cubs, guys, and they didn't have a pitching staff that was worth much at all. They went out and spent on John Lester. And John Lester was the fulcrum of that staff and really part of the heart of that team as they went out and won the 2016 World Series.
Yeah, and Lester actually came here, and they flipped him for somebody, I forget. But, Mike Rizzo was good at making deals. His undoing turned out to be what he did in the draft and developing players. And this is analysis from Gabe Locks in USA Today, and I'll read you some of what he wrote. Lengthy story. He says, "This has been a dead franchise walking for the better part of several years. A ball club seemingly on autopilot as longtime GM Mike Rizzo aimed to assemble a roster and install a player development infrastructure despite a less than thorough buy-in from ownership, while manager Davey Martinez lauded the boys for battling, coached the kids, and flailed them at the buttons of the bullpen when his options often boiled down to uh-oh and not him." So they weren't spending money on relief pitching, and there have also been reports that they weren't spending the kind of money that you need to develop the players as well. And this addresses what Barry Verluga wrote in his column today, that it seemed to him in lengthy conversations in spring training with Rizzo and Martinez, they seemed a little bit too comfortable. And Locks writes in USA Today, "All the while, Rizzo and Martinez operated in the realm of not unlike the kids in Peanuts, free to go about their business while unseen and rarely heard adults lurked in the background." He talked about the money that was flushed on Steven Strasburg, $245 million. Patrick Corbin, instrumental in winning that World Series in 2019. Yeah, but he had a lot of time and money left on the contract, $140 million, and gave them nothing but innings. He gave them a very high ERA, a lot of runs given up. He just ate up a bunch of innings. And how about this? The number of days that the Nationals have been not in first place, but just over 500. Number of days since they won the World Series in 2016. I know we had a pandemic in 2020 and the Strasburg injury and all the other things that went into that. But they have spent, since winning the World Series, 6 days over 500. 4 of them in 2021, 2 of them last year, none of them this year. He talked about the Juan Soto deal, where they sent him to San Diego for All-Stars James Wood, C.J. Abrams, and Mackenzie Gore. Wood and Abrams going this year, Gore last year, and 2 more young players in Robert Hassel and Harlan Susana. But as he points out about Rizzo here, and this is really an important part of the whole picture, he was undercut by his inability to, in the final 10-plus years of his tenure, Install a drafting and player development infrastructure to keep the talent pipeline moving. Since drafting Anthony Rendon 6th overall in 2011, the Nationals were largely a developmental black hole, save for guys who found greater success. See Lucas Giolito, Nick Pivetta, Eric Fetty, after the Nationals flipped them elsewhere. The franchise was mildly obsessed and truthfully ahead of the curve with deferring money. Max Scherzer in the fold, yet backfire in others, making their efforts to retain players like Bryce Harper seem unserious. A wave of homegrown stars from Harper to Trey Turner to Soto to Rendon. Yeah, Rendon, that's a signing I'm glad they didn't make. Found riches and often success elsewhere. Yes, and as a matter of fact, the Max Scherzer deal, when he signed here as a free agent from the Tigers, I've been told that did not involve the Lerners. Ted Lerner, Lerner made the deal, Rizzo did not. So the way it was told to me was Scott Boras, who became sort of the de facto GM here for a while, he worked with Ted Lerner exclusively, and Lerner told Rizzo, oh, yeah, I got you Max Scherzer. And they came up with the deferred money on there. They're still paying him. They're still paying him. But while he was pitching here, he was making, I guess, relatively low money. More from Locks. It took years for ownership to realize running a ball club was not unlike another real estate asset. A conveyor belt of veterans, both uniformed and baseball operations, complained over the years about missing essentials in the clubhouse, to needless expense report scrutiny and postseason travel arrangements that fell well below industry standard. Most recently, the club was well in the minority in failing to invest in the most cutting-edge training tool available to hitters, hardly dispelling the appearance the club was behind in analytics-oriented areas. Yet, in Rizzo, the ownership had a nice self-contained unit. He was free to run baseball operations quite well for many years, so as long as he accepted the Faustian bargain of mitigating ownership's idiosyncrasies, always willing to take a bullet. He might have been the Sonny Corleone at the toll booth. Rizzo was able to keep the franchise running at a high level, even if things didn't flow as naturally as other organizations. So now it's up to Mike DiBartolo to make this pick coming up in the draft next week. The team will also, and this is another important point of the picture, part of the picture, the team will also be TV free agents, with the long-awaited Masson settlement giving the franchise agency and its broadcast future, giving the franchise, I guess, free agency, a TV home, head of baseball ops, a new dugout chief. So I think this is a part of the picture if, in fact, they're going to be sold. Remember, they went up on the market. It's been 3 years. Yeah, it's 2022 when, before the season, it was announced that the Lerners were seeking either investors or a buyer, and Barry Verluga was among those who said, oh, yeah, I know that they're up for sale. And then they weren't up for sale. And remember when they were deciding whether to trade Juan Soto with 3 years left on his contract, or to re-sign him or keep him around, as Scott Boras always brings his guys to free agency. If they did that, would it be more valuable to have him under contract or as a free agent where the team ownership could make a decision on that? Well, that became moot when they made the deal, and it turned out to be a terrific deal, at least so far, for the Nationals. Soto is not going to the All-Star game. James Wood is. So, take that for what it's worth. But, I think you have to examine this in a prism of, okay, the picture has changed dramatically since 2022. The reported selling price of $2.1 billion, that seems easily attainable, with the Commanders selling for $6 billion, the Celtics selling for $8 billion, and the Lakers for $10 billion. Franchises are going up in value. So I would imagine they could get that and more now. That might be part of the picture. You also would not have the general manager or the manager under contract for next year. So whoever buys the team would have complete ability with no dead money to hire a new GM and a new manager, and they'd be out from under the Masson deal, which has been an albatross around this organization since the Expos came here in 2005. Remember, they were worried about Peter Angelos and all the suing he was doing, and they didn't want to be tied up in court with Angelos claiming this was his territory. So the way that was worked out was they said, okay, you'll control the broadcast rights for the Orioles and the Nationals, and you'll pay the Nationals a share of what you make. Well, that was tied up in court for years, and the Nationals had to sue and sue and sue, and they finally got their money. So that was something that a new owner wouldn't have to deal with. So it would be a clean slate for new ownership if, in fact, the team is sold either this season or in the offseason, and that you would not have a general manager, or a TV contract to deal with in terms of something left over in the sale. So it makes it interesting. Also, they finally have a jersey patch. I didn't have a chance to comment on this last week when I was out of town, but they had been the only team without a stadium and a naming rights deal, and a jersey patch sponsor. They still don't have a naming rights deal, but the jersey sponsor is going to be AARP, which I find kind of ironic. The deal is supposedly worth between $7 and $8 million. The Yankees have a deal with Star Insurance, which pays them $25. AARP, I didn't know this. It's based in D.C. It's for people like me, 50 and older, and was founded in 1958 as the American Association of Retired Persons. So it's, for a sport that wants to skew younger, an AARP package. But they say when you bring your kids or grandkids to the ballpark, this partnership is exciting for fans of all ages. We're proud to welcome AARP. I just sort of cringe at that with all the baseball's only for old people. That probably doesn't help things. All right, Bram is coming up next, and I will see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.